Good morning, class. Today we're going to talk about Windows Forms, a little bit of how to work in there, how to code, and maybe test a little the application a bit. And so we want to go back into our Visual Studio. We want to go to Windows Forms application, and let's do our usual. Always start with your name. So chop underscore, and then this is just going to be I'll just, because I don't have anything else to call it, I'm going to call it Chapter 3. Um, just Chapter 3. I'm going to call it testing, actually. Okay, so let's get there and make sure it's Visual Basic, and it is, and let's do it. Okay, our form pops up, and now we'll have some fun. Let's get into the code, and the first thing I want to talk about is objects, classes, instance of a class, instantiation. And so let's go ahead and throw some stuff out here on our form. Let's go to View, get our toolbox. Go ahead and pin it, and just go to the common controls, which is fine. And let's just do our usual, throw a label out and a text box. That's good enough for now. Maybe a button. Okay. So let's go over some definitions. An object is a self-contained unit that combines code and data. Two examples of objects are forms and controls. So what we did right here, what we just did, this form that we just created, is an object. Now, the controls, the label, and the box, and also the button are also objects. Now, we created this object. It has data, and there's also what's called code behind, which actually creates this thing. And then on the back side, this will also have code. Now, the next thing to talk about is a class. A class is the code that defines the characteristics of an object. You can think of a class as a template for an object. An object is an instance of a class, and the process of creating an object from a class is called instantiation. And more than one object instance can be created from a single class. So that's good. Okay. Properties define the characteristics of an object and the data associated with an object. Methods are the operations that an object can perform, and events are signals sent by an object to the application telling it that something has happened that can be responded to. Properties, methods, and events can be referred to as members of an object. If you instantiate two or more instances of the same class, all of the objects have the same properties, methods, and events. However, the values would vary from one instance to the other. Now, in the Form Designer, Visual Studio automatically generates Visual Basic code that creates a new class based on the form class. And then when you run the project, a form object is instantiated from the new class. When you add a control to a form, Visual Studio automatically generates Visual Basic code in the class for the form that instantiates a control object from the appropriate class and sets the control default properties. When you move and size a control, such as when we do the text box, Visual Studio automatically sets the properties that specify the location and the size of the control. Example of that, let's say the button. We'll double click on the button. And the button, we created our event handler, which we've already been working with in some of our previous code. And so here's the private subroutine with the event handler for the button one click that we just created. This code was automated. Now, if we wanted to do something in here, let's say with the text box that we also have, let's go ahead and say this. If you go back to the Visual Basic, we have a text box. It's going to be automatically designated as a text box 1. And when you go to properties, you'll see the text box. Well, let's click it up here. It's called text box 1 right here. And so if we go back to our form or to our code, we can call that object. We can say, okay, text box 1 dot, and as soon as you do that, this is going to show you the member list. This is called the member list, But these are the properties of that text box. So all the different things that we can do with it. And usually for us, we're going to be setting text, and we will put it equal to something. In this case, let's just put it to something like that. So text box 1, property of text box 1, which is text, equals text. But there are other properties of the text box, for example, the scale, the size of it, all those kind of things, which are hidden in a different part of the code called the code behind. Example, right here where we say textbox1.text equals test. Remember, in our computer programming languages, the computer will always reads from left to right. And so it says textbox1.text, and then we are assigning whatever's on the right. So textbox1.text is being assigned the string test. Now, we could, in Visual Basic, we could put a number here and assign it an integer or something like that. Of course, strings have to be enclosed in these quotations. Something else we could do too is we could change a property of the text box. So let's do an example of that. And let's say read only. Now this is going to have a Boolean value. And Boolean values just mean true or false. It's either 1 or a 0, true, false. So in this case here, we said, okay, textbox1 dot read only is true. So if we were to save that and go back to our design view, then this, and we were to run this, then we wouldn't be able to enter anything in here because it's read only. We just set that property to read only. What I want to show you with this is when you click on an object, such as our text box, you can go into the properties, and I usually just do a right click and then click on properties. You can see the different properties and events. If you click on the little lightning bolt, you can see the different events that you can use. For example, mouse down, mouse enter, hover, and these are just really common ones that we sometimes use. Multi-line changed, I'll sometimes use that one. Text change is another one that you might use. And so these are just really common events that can happen in a property. Let's see what else. If you scroll up, this is another one really common is focus. Something happens when this object has focus. So for example, what you would do here is if you had written a function or a method or something that made something happen, some type of method or function, and you wanted it to be triggered whenever somebody entered this property, then you would set that here. Or when they left it, you would set it here, depending on what it is you want to happen. These actions up here are the most common. So what happens if they click on something like button click? What happens if they click on it? So you might write a function or a method, and you would then enter it here, or double click. So these are just your most common options. The next thing I want to talk about is just a couple of rules that we have when we code in Visual Basic, and that is you use spaces to separate words. So, for example, if we were going to put something in here and we wanted to, let's say, declare a variable, but we would normally do that on top. So let's do that up here, and we would say, okay, dim, and we'll just say x as int. That's the usual one that we do. Okay, so we declared x. We're going to initialize it as int16. We've gone over this before in a different video. So, anyways, if we wanted to continue our code because it was going to continue onwards, you could do that with an underscore, and then that means that we're going to continue to write underneath it. In this case, we're not going to do that because that doesn't quite work with this code. But if there was something else where you're writing a bunch of code and you want to continue it going underneath, for example, I don't know, if you had to continue another line of code, you would just do it as an underscore, just something to know. Sometimes when you're coding, you'll get a lot of code and you want to collapse that and shrink it up. And so this little thing here is how you do that. Wherever you see this minus sign, you can click on it and it'll shrink a little bit of code. And you do that as your code is accumulating and you need to focus on one piece of code and you're kind of done with another part, and you can collapse the part that you're done working on. Another tip that I use quite often is sometimes I need this to be larger so that I can see it better. And all you need to do is hold down your control key, and then use your mouse to zip up, to scroll up or down, and that will increase or decrease the size of your code. Just comes in handy every once in a while. Another little thing that's kind of cool is, let's say you wanted to get the user of the system. You could simply do this. We're going to set the property of Textbox1 to text, so we're going to set the text, and then here we just type in my dot user dot name, and this will get the current user of the system. So if I run this, our little app comes up. We can click the button, and there I am. This comes in handy. Let's say that we're going to build an application. We want to grab the name of the user. Then we can just do this. It's kind of handy. So the assignment that you'll have due for next week is the calculator letter grade assignment. Now, I don't want you to use any of the downloaded code. I want you to do this yourself, and I want you to do it in the manner that I've been teaching you, and that is to create up here an additional subroutine, possibly a function, depending on how you design it. And then over here, we're going to call that subroutine. So we want to keep everything nice and clean. So let's say we wanted to get started with, well, let's get back to our form and generate this properly. Okay, so let's move our button down, and we'll just do our properties. Let me do a little bit of work, and then I'll explain what's going on. So gotta get out of that to go back to here. And instead of the text saying label 1, we're going to call it number grade. We already have the text box we'll be using, and let's not rename this. Let's just leave them text box 1. Keep it nice and simple. Let's throw another label out there, and do the same with this one. And the text box. So this will be text box 2. And so what we want to be able to do is enter a grade in here. So enter a number. So let's say a 70% or an 80%. And then down here, it needs to output an A, B, C, or D. Again, I don't want you to use any downloaded code. I want you to program this on your own. But you know, we can start getting started here, and let's say I don't know, let's see. So this is where we're going to get our input, and I know that this could be done much simpler, but I'm just trying to teach the fundamentals of functions and subroutines, which is why we're doing it in this manner, even though it's a really simple little project. And here, let's just call this one, what should we call this? With convert grade. That sounds reasonable. And remember what I said, a function always has to return something, so let's go ahead and throw an output here. We know that we're going to output a single letter grade, so I'll go ahead and give you the first one. Let's just call this a dim, and let's say we're going to use a char since it'll be a letter grade. As I got this wrong. Let's call it LG as char. And then, like I said, every function has to return something, so let's go ahead and get that done now. And all right, now you're ready. So here, we're going to have some kind of decision point. We're going to get our information, whatever it is, and then we're going to have to call the convert grade. And then in here is where we're actually going to do the conversion, return it, and then output it. So right now we have a subroutine, and the subroutine, we'll just go ahead and get this set up. Should get the input, and so when the button's clicked, it'll get the input. The input is going to call the conversion grade. It's going to do its thing and output the correct grade. So you might have another function here. It depends on how you set this up. So happy coding. You have your assignment.